On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Michael Simanga. Dr. Simanga is an activist educator, writer, producer, former publisher of Third World Press, the oldest independent Black press in the U.S., and current co-editor of The Black Scholar, a leading journal of Black thought since 1969. He was a leading member of the Congress of African People and in other Black Power era organizations. Dr. Simanga teaches Africana Studies and History at Morehouse College in Atlanta. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Michael Simanga, activist, writer, multi-disciplinary artist, and educator, also currently a teaching assistant professor at Morehouse. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. So let's dive into it. How did you get into doing the work of Black Studies, and what keeps you committed to that work?
I was raised in it actually before it became a thing called Black Studies. My mother and father and aunts and uncles, they were all very much immersed in Black life and history and literature. And so as a child, I didn't have a choice but to read certain kinds of books. Or to listen to certain kinds of, they used to have speeches recorded on like a large disc, and you play it on the radio and you would hear like Malcolm X speeches and things like that. So I was always a part of it. And as I got older, I really understood what they were doing. They never told us, did you like this or not? Or you have to do this. They would just put it on or give us a book, and we had to, it became not a we had to, it's we want to as we grew older. So that's my beginning with Black Studies. Behind me is 1/10 of the books in this room, and that's the way my mother had books. She was like, okay, read this, put it on the shelf, read this, put it on the shelf. She and my father grew up in a small town outside of Detroit called Inkster, Michigan, which is also where Malcolm X went to live with his brother when he got out of prison. And Inkster, like many of these enclaves, was a town for working in the factory, an auto factory. Mm-hmm. And both my parents were very well read, but they didn't have any formal training in higher education. My mother was determined to be a teacher. And so she used to take my brother and I to University of Detroit. It was about 1.5 mile walk. And we didn't have but one car. My father used that to go to work and come back. So with that, she told us stories along the way. When we got to the college, she would sit us in the hall with some snacks and something to read or something to draw on, and she would go in class, and everybody in the class knew us. They were like, "Oh, are you all in college?" It's like, "Yeah, we're in the hallway in college, and it's fun." But I feel very fortunate, and my generation, that was not a universal thing. There was Black life and culture as it was passed on, and as we discovered it, was a universal thing. But to become focused on an academic library, a literary library, those things became organized in a way. The Harlem Renaissance is the first big effort to do that. But beyond that, until we get to the next stage of Africana studies as a field that is comparable to any other studies. Nobody that I've ever known who studied French studies, and I have several friends from Africa which I thought was kind of interesting and odd, but I understood it later that they were trying to understand the work of the people who had oppressed them, and so that they could teach it, not the way that their oppressors wanted it taught, but the way they knew they had to make it available for other people to understand what that experience was like. So I was in Senegal many, many years ago. I've been many times since then. But a group of people were talking, and they said something, and then I said something back in French, and they stopped. Said, "We didn't know you spoke French," and it was really our interpreter too. We had somebody from the United States. This was during the drought and famine of the 1980s. We were in Senegal and Burkina Faso and a couple of other places. But it shocked me too that I had taken French in high school. I think my French teacher was kind enough to pass me, even though I did not do well. I was not paying attention, but it came back, this knowledge that I had acquired and never used. And I think that's similar to Black studies, is why I'm saying that. It's that there's this whole wave in the 20th century, in this, like I said, in this greatest form, is the Harlem Renaissance, but also the organization of social and political movements, the NAACP, the Garvey movement, et cetera, and et cetera. And those things created not just the demand for change, not just the historical narrative, but they created a whole body of learning that included many, many things. One in particular is that in the 20th century, Black music takes many forms, which then travel all the way around the world. And oftentimes without attribution, but by some folks who, claim that this is their music, just fine. They can participate in our music. But what I don't agree with is when you say this is our music, as opposed to they did this and we learned from it. It's one of the things I like about a lot of the white rock and roll musicians. They were in awe of like Black blues people. And even still to this day, it's kind of tragic too. I was at a concert in Clarksdale, Mississippi a few years back. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they do a summer concert. So they have lots of blues and jazz and stuff. And I went to the venues like a school yard field. And there was probably 5% Black people there out of 2,000 people. And it not only puzzled me, but it broke my heart that our own music, we won't, we don't have the same relationship. So I'm saying all those things. We tend to look at Black studies as a thing to exist, but it's the thing that always existed. We just hadn't formalized it.
Mm-hmm.
That explosion of Black literature, the defining of these genres of Black music, from spirituals to blues, jazz, gospel music, R&B, soul, all of those things became these iconic kinds of categories that came out of the Black experience. And I said the Black experience because it's universal for all of us who didn't sing it or didn't write it or whatever, but it's still us. But the other thing is that it was shaping a profound academic catalog that we now have about all of those things that were being done. And there's still so much more to be discovered and developed and presented. I think for a lot of us in academia, we write for many reasons. One of those reasons is tenure. One of those reasons is promotion. I know many, many people who wrote great books that never got circulated other than to get them to the next level. And that's tragic to me because it means it's not in a library somewhere that somebody can look up. It's not been promoted. Feel very fortunate that I grew up in the Black Power era. I was born in 54 and had parents and community that, really emphasized us learning this stuff, but not like in an oppressive way. We were kids, and so they would do it in the way that young people would learn. And to this day, I read every day. I think I would fall down dead if I didn't read something on a day. That would have to be the only explanation, but always have a book. In fact, my students say, why you always have these books? I said, why don't you have books? And we have this whole discussion about the differences in generation. When I first discovered this, it took me days to kind of figure out how I was going to address this. I always ask at the beginning of every semester, what books do you read? And they always respond the same way. We don't really read books. We look up stuff online and say, what do you mean you don't read books? And so that's part of the discovery, but also how do we make that bridge? Because we can't lose books.
Yeah.
Educated people. We cannot lose books and be a people who have, the kind of agency that is needed for us to be able to move ourselves in the way that we want to and get things done the way we want to. But there's a whole generation that doesn't read books, and they're smart, but they're like iPhone smart, and which is full of everything you'd ever want. But it doesn't, in my opinion, it does not give them the depth of reading a book. They read to get information. And every once in a while, one of them will say, have you ever read this book, Doc? And I'm like, yeah, when I was your age. It's a good book. And they're like, it's like the first time you go to a good movie. But I don't know how that's going to play out in this century, but it will. I mean, this information has to be known. It has to be passed on generation to generation. But I'm trying to learn from them and at the same time have them understand why there was a fight for Black studies, why in all of the universities in the entire world, there was no class that said Black studies or Africana studies or African American studies. And like everything else that we accomplished, we had to fight for it and we had to be unyielding. And oftentimes I think that people feel, I've even had this discussion with Black people who wonder why we have that in the curriculum. So why do we have French studies in the curriculum? Why do we have English studies? Why do we have Shakespeare in the curriculum? Because those are the things of the times. And if you're trying to have some kind of understanding of the world, then you have to go back before you can go forward. You have to get to a point where you can do both simultaneously. You can go back and also do what's happening now and also think about the future. Those things are all a part of Africana studies. And I think it's expanded so well so that we have different components to it. It's not just Africana studies or African American studies or African studies, but there's Africana women studies, there's Africana queer studies. I think there's all kinds of things that are still building our library. And we still have to learn, teach, and fight for those people who some people dismiss as being important in the canon. But I know I talked a long time out of that one question, so let me come back to you.
No, that was great. Thank you. I think you said a lot of things that are really important to remember and to highlight. I do want to follow up a little bit on some of the things you said. One, I do want to just ask about growing up in the Detroit area at that time. I'm from Michigan and I have a lot of family in Detroit. So I've been to Inkster, I've been around all of the little suburbs of Detroit. And my grandmother and my great aunts, they grew up in Detroit earlier than you, but they're there. So I wanted to ask a little bit about that, as well as some of the activist work that you've done, which it sounds like the foundation was set for at very young ages.
Tell you my first act of organizing. I think I was 7. My brother was in the Boy Scout troop near our house. Actually, it was in our elementary school. And there was a man, his name will come to me, I hope, before this is finished, who was the scout leader. Mm-hmm. But he was also the Michigan director of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And so he had been in and out of the South. He was involved in a lot of organizing the marches and stuff, the SCLC and NAACP. And whenever he would come back, he would have a Boy Scout meeting. It's masterful organizing. And half of the meeting would be Boy Scout stuff. And then the other half of the meeting would be civil rights stuff. And then he would send us home every week with something to give to our parents. So that was my first experience of organizing. During that same time, my mother, who again was very active, we lived in the west side of Detroit in a little frame house. I still go by and look at that house and think, wow, we were all in there. You you walk in, you're in the living room, there's a little dining room, the kitchen's back there, 2 bedrooms, and that's it, 7 or 8 people, and sometimes it'd be an uncle or aunt that needed a place to stay and they'd sleep on the couch. I actually love that life. I feel like young people who don't get to experience that life, they don't really understand the bonding and stuff. But my mother was also very active around a couple of things during that time. And one of them, we lived on the street, the expressway cut through our neighborhood. And so we lived on the part of the cut through that it was only one block. So there was the street Finkel, you ever hear Finkel? Yeah. So Finkel was the main street, and then our block, and then a bridge over the expressway, and then 6 blocks where all that used to be one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these trucks parked their car near where we lived, and they were all times of night, these big 18-wheelers, and they would drive through our neighborhood, and kids are walking to school. It was a whole thing. And so my mother created a petition and had some meetings where people talked about it and how can we change this. And a lot of the people who lived in our neighborhood at the time, which is what I loved about it too, was the diversity of it. We had some people who had gone to college. Those were the smallest percentage. Almost all of the men in my neighborhood worked in the factory. There were a few teachers in that neighborhood, and they were all women. And so it's a very interesting time where Black people who had different resources, different standing in white America, different positions in their own Black community, in the same area. It was like that all over Detroit and just about every other major city where teachers live next to domestic workers and so on. So she created this petition, went downtown on the bus because we only had one car. My father drove that to the factory and dragged us along as she did. Then there was only 2 of us, my brother and I. And she went to whatever this room was and had this petition, and she studied all this stuff, and they tried to deny her, and she just was smarter than them and knew more than them, which really pissed them off because you had to go talk to white people about this, right? And they almost universally, and I know there was some that were not like this, but they always talked down to Black people at that time. And it was kind of comical to watch them try to understand the words my mother was using, but she did deliberately. It was very like she had been to graduate school and stuff. And so those kind of experiences taught me how to organize and how to pay attention to things and what tools you have to create if they don't exist. And how do you get people who have different perceptions, different levels of education, different socioeconomic status. How do you get all of that together? And the civil rights movement was such a profound lesson in that. The Montgomery bus boycott as an example. Most of the leadership were highly educated, like Dr. King. He had all these degrees. He came from a family of educated people. And a lot of the people who went on the front line and went to jail and prison and got beatings and their houses bombed and stuff like that, they may not have had a high school education. Some of them didn't have a junior high school education. I can't remember this woman's name right now, but she was a domestic worker and a cook. And her contribution to that cause was she cooked meals every day and sold them to people, and then gave the money to the movement, to the Montgomery Improvement Association. And I always think about her. I'm trying to remember her name, because we tend to look at the heroic figures,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the heroic figure. The people who did stuff like that, that's more heroic to me than speaking in front of a microphone. She said, how can I contribute? And so she cooked up the best meals. Dr. King talks about her food like it was magic or something. And I was thinking, yeah, we all know some Black women and men who can cook like that. And it's like beyond what you just normally get someplace. It's like, oh, this is so good. You just don't want to leave. You shouldn't be eating all that food. You shouldn't eat some of those, some of the things there. But the idea that everybody has something to contribute, and that it is as valuable as the known leadership. In Birmingham, when that church was blown up, I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures, but there are some pictures of Black men who all showed up with rifles. After that, like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody else is coming up in here and doing anything else. And it's very tragic. I can't even imagine the community pain and the personal and family pain of that heinous act. But this is one of the things I learned as a child, that you have to change something, you have to do something. And so I was kind of led to this, and I gravitated to it at a very young age. By the time I got to high school, I was engaged in a lot of school activities that had to do with the students. I was president of the student council when I was 14, 15. It's one of the founders of the Black Student Union. This is kind of funny. We had the first Detroit Public School commemoration of Malcolm X in 1969, because it took a while for all that to get put together.
Mm-hmm.
And without, the school board and everybody resisted it. So 4 years after Malcolm is assassinated, and there are a couple of people, a brother named Jeff Edison, who's a very, very beautiful and profound scholar and attorney. His law partner in this early life, Chokwe Lumumba, the name Chokwe Lumumba? Mm-hmm. He was elected mayor of Jackson, and then had some health issues and passed while he was there. I don't think he finished that term, but both of them were in law school at Wayne State University, which had been fighting for Black studies at Wayne State University. There's some pictures of them in handcuffs from, sitting in and refusing to leave, similar to other places, including Morehouse, where, and I might be paraphrasing this and leaving a couple of things out, but the board refused to even discuss at some point having Black studies at Morehouse. Some of them still had those same ideas, but it's okay. And there's a story that I've been able to get people to, stamp that it's real. Is that Sam Jackson, while the board is having the meeting or whatever the group is called, and he locked them in the room and wouldn't let them out until they agreed to support Black studies in Morehouse. So, there's all kinds of things that are happening, and that was the world I grew up in. Detroit was a really progressive city for Black people, and in this moment, 1969, they were able to get permission to, and we're going to do it anyway, but it's going to be outside. But they got permission to have a program in the library on the commemoration of the death of Malcolm X. So I go to the meetings, the Black Student Union, it's maybe 10 people there, and this guy I'm telling you about, Jeff Edison, he's going around the room. He's like, okay, you're going to read a poem. You're going to do like an interpretive dance, right? You're going to sing. And it just went on and on. You're going to quote Malcolm, read from his speeches, on and on. And it got to me, I was the only person who didn't have an assignment and probably would not have had one if I didn't show up. I just went because I'd heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he looked over at me. He said, "Yeah, brother, what you doing?" And I said, "No, I just came to, He said, No. We work when we're a part of these things. So what are you going to do? Oh, no, I know what you're going to do. You're going to give a speech about Malcolm's philosophy and his ideas and stuff." I was like, "What?" Actually, honestly, yeah, it was very disturbing to me. So I go home and I tell my parents, and my father goes to a friend of his and gets one of Malcolm's speeches that's on vinyl. It's actually, I think, distributed by Motown at the time. And that may not be true, but I think so. And so I listened to this thing all night, and I was writing down stuff and had all these notes that look like my notes today. See how that looks? I still take notes like that on envelopes, on the back of paper and everything. So he said, "You ready?" I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm ready." I'm shaking and shivering. I get up on that stage, and it was like I was a preacher. And I've been giving public speeches since then. I was the only person who got a standing ovation, a long standing ovation. And I didn't even know what I had said. It was hypnotic to me. And from that day on, I've been a public speaker. Uh, that's the story. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is, you know, Africana studies organized these things, these stories, these documents, these ideas, these people, so that it has value beyond a little black boy terrified on the stage and then saying, "Whew, yes, I did okay," after that, and stop being afraid. I've not been afraid to be on the stage since then. Um, it doesn't matter where, when, whether I prepared or not, I can give a similar speech right now, this minute. If you ask me, "Can you come, the speaker didn't come, can you come in and talk about so-and-so?" Because I've been trained over,
Mhm.
50 years plus to do that. And that's a part of the oral tradition of Black studies, that it existed before it became an academic, what's the word?
Skill, discipline.
Yes, an academic discipline. See, part of that is, as you can probably tell, is that my mind is always racing. I'm always thinking about 2, 3 things at the same time. Um, and I'm older, so now my ability to just remember everything simultaneously has diminished some. And some of my colleagues and friends and relatives, they say, "That doesn't bother you, man?" I said, "No, I'm still alive." You know, everybody I know in this age group stutters, forgets what they were saying. And that's a part of how life develops. That is my job, to teach what I know, to expose students to what I feel like they should be exposed to, and also to learn from them. But this is the time for the next generation now. And it's our responsibility to prepare them for the work they have to do. This is a terrible time to be coming into adulthood as a Black woman or man. And so Africana studies, which I'm surprised at this point has not been attacked so heartily yet as some other, things have. I think it's coming.
Yeah.
And that we have to decide how we are going to respond to it, because we cannot let other people decide that the only history, the only literature, the only music is stuff that they approve or create or steal and call it their own. So to have a group of people who were always preparing communities, as an example, before I go there, when I tell the students, first of all, I ask them, "Do you all know what the Black National Anthem is?" And they look as puzzled as if I said, "Do you know who Khrushchev was that's coming through the door?" You know what I mean? They're like, "Huh, I think," and then some of them say, I think, "Isn't that the thing that people sing in church or something?" But none of them knew it.
Mm.
And so we not only talked about it, but we broke it down and What does this mean? Why are they saying this? And that this song had been sung in every major gathering in every Black church for 100 years.
Yep.
Suddenly it disappeared. And that's problematic for me, and I think for us in the discipline. That's something that is that important that for 100 years in churches, at weddings, at funerals, at gatherings of families, this song, this music was there to steel us for the next moment and the next day. It was there to tell us that, no, we're going to get it. We're okay. And for those who believe in God, it was a direct connection every time.
Mm-hmm.
That song is telling you, God ain't on the side of the wicked. It's on our side, the formerly enslaved, the impoverished. It is she is on our side. So a lot of those things are in my mind right now about, how do I transfer knowledge that I have that they don't have, not because they don't want it, because nobody said you should, do this. Another example of that, I play music every class period, but I don't play their music. I don't play their music at all. We play blues, jazz, gospel, soul, and we talk about the history of those things, and they're mesmerized. And I say, yeah, a lot of the stuff you hear in your music came from that.
Mm-hmm.
And not just came from it in terms of an inspiration, but actual parts of it are in your music. And then we kind of look at it. That's about a 15-minute part of every class as we start by listening to music. Last week we did a thing about why rhythm is so foundational and important to Black music. And they kind of knew because, hip hop is very rhythmic and
Mm-hmm.
experiential. So we go through this exercise. We start with African drums. I use Olatunji's Sounds of Africa, Drums of Africa, 1960s recording. It's amazing. And I make them close their eyes and tell me how many different rhythms you hear. And when we finish, because I don't play the whole thing, maybe 5 minutes of it. And then I say, so everybody tell me how many rhythms. And so somebody say, I heard 5. And I said, what were the 5? And somebody else would say, well, I heard 3. I heard 8. And they say, how come I didn't know about this? I said, well, one of the reasons you don't know about it is because it's deeply a foundational part of our culture. And so it's like eating certain foods. You don't say, why did we do that?
Mm-hmm.
It's just in the culture. And the difference is that in Africana studies, we are taking those things that we took for granted or that some people still took for granted, not in a negative way, but just our expectation. As a child, as a young adult, as an old adult, is that if I go someplace where Black people are gathering around something important, they're going to sing, lift every voice and sing. We walked out of our school for things like that to make the administration have to allow, they still had the band play the Star Spangled Banner, but nobody was not talking during that time. They were like, hey, how you doing today, Ashley? Then they'd be playing the American national anthem. But then that choir would come out from the school choir, and they would sing, lift every voice and sing. And they had amazing teachers because they would change the tempo. They would do arrangements that I had never heard before. But the core of it was this message
Mm-hmm.
that we cannot be defeated. This is the thing that I teach all the time. We have never been defeated. We have been captured. We have been enslaved. We have been killed. We have been denied. But we have never been defeated. And in fact, it's in one of my books. This idea of the need for Black studies to be codified in the academy is very important. And it's still surprising how few schools have it.
Yeah.
And I think there'd be fewer having it in this climate right now. but that all of this was fought for. And when the students at Wayne State University and University of Detroit and places like that walked out demanding Black studies, we would leave school and go down and be on the line with them. Finally, we were able to get, and I think this is 1969, 69, 70. We were able to get them to concede they would allow us to have one Black history class. And that class, you know how those schools back then, the classrooms are not very big. I mean, they can house 30 people in there, but they shouldn't. You know what I mean? Or 40 people in there. It would be so packed in there. People would skip class to come to this class, and the door would be open because there'd be people sitting all out in the hall. And other teachers just stopped marking them absent because they were just not. This one class, like, well, I need to go to this class. And literally, sometimes it would be 100 students in the hallway. And the teacher, I can't remember his name right now. He taught that one class. Next semester, we had 2 classes of that topic, and it became more and more important. When I went to that school, it was majority white and Jewish. By the time I graduated, there were probably 10 white people in the class. And I mean, they were fleeing like stuff was on fire. And some of them were very radical, including their parents. Had some friends, still have some friends whose parents would not let them leave the school and go out into a white suburb. They were like, we're going to still live here, and you're going to go to that public school with all them Black kids. And those people were some of the most interesting white people I've ever met. Their parents and their children, because they were all activists. Some labor organizers, some of them were teachers, and they were active in the teachers union. My mother at one point was president of the teachers union. But all of these things are brewing and moving very fast. And the teaching that I got from my parents and my aunts and uncles and the friends of our family, and listening to Malcolm X and Dr. King and all of that stuff, had me prepared for this. And I forgot for a long time that my parents, the first march that became the March on Washington was in Detroit.
Yep.
Over 100,000 people. And my parents and aunts and uncles were all a part of that. They were some strange people, though, because they wouldn't say stuff. They would be like, oh, yeah, we went downtown today for the Martin Luther King March. And then it would just like keep walking. It was just casually dropped on us like, really, what'd you do? I mean, that's what we wanted as young people. We wanted to know what was going on. And Detroit was one of the most of the Black Power cities. Like what you were talking about earlier, Detroit was a very Black city. At one point it was almost 80% Black. But the politics of it and the culture was very strong there. The Shrine of Black Madonna, the Nation of Islam's first temples in Detroit, has all of this rich history. Have you seen this statue on the edge of the river? If you go downtown, straight down Woodward Avenue, then you can walk over to the Detroit River, and it's a monument of Black people who had escaped slavery and now were crossing over into Canada. Detroit's the only city I know in the country that celebrates Kwanzaa openly. Have you seen the gigantic Kwanzaa candles? And somebody asked me, they said, does Detroit always do stuff like this? I said, yes. I know more Detroit to wear African clothes than Africans wear. Shoot, I know more people in Detroit that speak Swahili. I know more people who, understand Ebonics and all of these things, because it was a very vibrant city around justice and self-determination. And being able to have a class, one class, then 2 classes, then a whole, canon and the ability to get a degree. I used to have people ask all the time about that. Should I get a degree in Africana studies or African American studies? What am I going to do with it? Say, what do you do with a white studies class? And they go like, what's a white studies class? I say, American history. Oh. That's the white studies, unless we're teaching it.
Right.
Progressive person who says, yeah, no, we can't just teach Europe as world studies. And it's kind of a revelation for them, for the students, when you ask them about things. You say, so what exactly is world studies or world history? And they fumble it because they've not had many classes that were not European based. You know, they know all about the kings and queens and the murderous behavior and the colonization and all of the stuff, the poverty of the average white person and all of those things. But they don't know much about Europe. They know those things which psychologically they're heroic, these heroic figures. You know, I just cannot believe that England, for instance, still has a figurehead, billions of dollars a year, royal family, kings and queens. What do they do that's worth anything other than pose? You know what I mean? So all of that money that they get, what could be done with that money for people who are not rich or not middle class, or they need more schools or more food, or you need to give some of that to the former colonies that you left in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I think about it like that when I went into high school, that was the way world history was taught. There was some mention of the ancient societies of China and, you know, places like that, but no mention of Africa other than a passing interest, and it was connected to colonialism. You know, Africa had all these abundant of stuff, and Europeans went and civilized them. It's so hard to even say that was in a book someplace, that this is the book people were being taught from, you know. Yeah. And, you know, Africans came to America. Doesn't say they were stolen or any of that stuff. You know, these books were horrific. But that was part of the fight. That was part of the fight, both for Africana studies, but for a discipline that includes very specific history and general history throughout the world. And it's kind of interesting now. I'm happy that I've lived this long to see those things, and that we fought for them and were able to encourage people to get degrees in this. We had to fight for them to be degree-making disciplines. You know, you can teach it, but you're still in the history department. You can teach it, but you're still in the English department. And to have those things now that exist, for us to have academic organizations, you know, that gather every year and continue this push for not just the existing scholarship, but that we push for more and more out of the history and the current and how we dream the future. Because we have to dream it in order for it to exist. And I think that this is a good time, but it's also a difficult time because generations didn't come through social movements.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have parents who do, but even those, like my children, you know, they've been to all kinds of stuff, all kinds of black stuff. They've been black their whole life, right? And I asked my youngest daughter recently to take my granddaughter, her sister's daughter, to go see Elvin Ailey. She was like, I've seen Elvin Ailey. I said, yeah, but it's not for you. It's for part of her education. And because they work and they have their own life and stuff, they always have to ponder, do I want to do this right now? Or do I, you know, want to go do something else? And I have to coerce them. Well, you did ask me for some money yesterday, right? And I was thinking about it. So all of those things, though, but I think it's incumbent upon us in Africana studies to not only fight for its existence, and I know a lot of places that are under siege right now and they're trying to, you know, wipe them out, but also take it out of the academy and build curriculums for schools that are public schools, private schools, but also community schools and community events in churches. That's a lot of the work I did when I graduated from high school, 1971, and started with some other young people. A couple of them were 20 something. I was 17 at the time. And we started an after school program first, called the Ujima School. Ujima is one of the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. And we started this school that became much more, but there was an Episcopal church 2 blocks from where the Detroit Rebellion started, on a street called 12th Street. And so we went to this new young Episcopal kind of radical minister who would become the minister for the church. And we asked him about it, and he was like, yeah, you can do that. Here's a key to the church. What day you going to be coming and stuff. And he gave us resources that way. He helped us get grants and stuff. It's very radical kind of Episcopal minister, because they're very, they're very Catholic-like to one sense, and high rankings and stuff like that. And I used to tease him all the time. I said, man, when y'all gonna sing some music? When you gonna have people singing our music? So he did it. He helped create a gospel choir in this, that denomination is very quiet, and it's like Catholicism. You just be very, very, be good. Just don't say anything. Don't start yelling and stomping your feet and all that. But the really, really kind of radical change, and there was a group of them. I'm trying to think the name of it. There was a group of Black ministers who were all very progressive. But it turned from doing just an after school program. Our thinking was always, we cannot just do one thing that's connected to many things. We may not have the capacity to do many things, but we do have to have some connection to those things. So as an example, in addition to the reading and strengthening their academic skills, but this tremendous exposure to Black literature. And it started off as I think 1st through 4th grade. And then we had teenagers. Sometimes we had young adults in there, and they wanted to learn the same thing, because there was no place that was teaching, about Africa, about African American studies and all of those things. So one day a young girl came in our class, came to our program, and she had a huge patch on her face. She was maybe 7. And everybody was kind of like, the teachers, we were all, you okay? What happened? And she said, a rat bit me in the face. And when somebody says that to you, it takes a minute for your mind to process what just got through said, because I'd have been terrified and doing everything I could to get this rat off my face. And we were all curious, what do you mean a rat bit you in the face? When I was sleeping, a rat jumped in my bed and bit my face for food. So we knew at that moment that we had to go beyond what we were doing and do more community work. And this was our first big project. So we went to the Board of Health about it. They taught us all this stuff. They gave us books and trained us and things. And then we started this campaign that was about maybe 4 blocks horizontally and 12 blocks, whatever that other word is. And knocking on every door, every flat that had 2 or 3 families, every apartment building. And we talked about how to prevent rats from, and the Board of Health came with us. They sent people to work with us. And that was one of the most profound lessons for me in terms of organizing. There was a big empty lot where I think 4 houses had been on, and it was burned down during the rebellion. There were a lot of blocks like that. You could still see remnants of it, 12th Street. And so we asked the city if we could have it. And they were like, no, somebody's going to try to buy it. We need the revenue, blah, blah, blah. So we just went and dug up all the stuff, the bricks, the glass and everything, and turned it into a community park. We went and borrowed a couple of benches from some places that they were just sitting around. Nobody was sitting on them. Took them back there. We had community events, and what it does is it begins to help you understand that organizing and teaching is not one thing. It's a lot of things. And it's important for us to learn as much as possible. But the most important lesson is that these are not people who are different from us. These are people whose circumstances different than us.
Right.
It does not mean that they're lesser or greater or whatever. And it humbles you because you have to break away all your own misconceptions about both who you are and who they are. That's what was so compelling about the civil rights movement. You know, that many of the people in those marches could not read and write. You know, many of them had maybe third grade education, eighth grade education, very few college education. But the fact that college students, when SNCC was formed, decided this was our mission, to be on the side of these people and to learn from them, not just to come and teach them because we're college students or we've been to college, but to learn from them more than anything. And they actually knew more and were smarter than those students. And there's a lot of times when you hear them talking about that, yeah, I thought that I was smart. I was in college and stuff like that. That dude over there, he's got like an encyclopedia in his head, stuff I've never heard of. So Black Studies has to, I think, continue that tradition of the organization of knowledge and what is the source of that knowledge. Why is it important? The juxtaposition of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King could not have been more profound. Malcolm X, a criminal, a convict, had amazing capacity to read, but didn't read a lot of books at that time. He was just, he's a hustler. Have you seen the show, The Godfather of Harlem?
Yep.
Isn't that amazing that would be, when I first heard about it, people said, yeah, they had this thing about Malcolm X. I thought they just had a cameo that somebody would come in there, but that the storyline is built around those two lives.
Yeah.
And for modern cinema and storytelling, that was a person who really understood why Malcolm was important, what he came from, what he accomplished. On the other side of that spectrum, Martin Luther King really didn't know what he was going to do. Kind of knew, I know I'm going to be a pastor because my, Daddy King's is big influential, but I don't really know what I want to do. I think I want to teach at Morehouse, my alma mater. I think I want to teach in the academy. But he didn't really know, just like Malcolm didn't know. And it's always funny to me, in Eyes on the Prize, there's I think it might be the first reel where they're talking about Montgomery. And they interviewed Dr. King. He says, we understand that you are the president of this organization or something. And, King talked in this reel. Well, I was asked by the people if I would be willing to be the chair. And I thought that'd be a good idea. And Coretta said, you should do it. And every time I hear that, it makes me laugh. So I was thinking, this dude didn't know what he was getting into.
Okay.
Was he a privileged Black person? And in most of our cities, people who had that stature and people who shine shoes, which is a job I had, that was the first job I had in my life, lived in the same space. They interacted. There might be better houses on that end of the street, but those people talk to each other. They would be like, hey, Ashley, how you doing today? And, it was just a community. And so even the privileged in the community to take on the task of confronting Jim Crow and breaking the law and changing the law, he had no experience with that. He didn't know anything about that. He knew about some of his great mentors and leaders, but he didn't know what he was getting into. But it didn't take him long, just like it didn't take Malcolm long, to say, yeah, I've been given something that I'm supposed to do. Here's something. They both died 13 years after after their public life began. 13 years. It's so much stuff. It's hard to even imagine that it could be 13 years.
Yeah.
And that both of them died within 13 years of that level of their life. So these things now, there's a little bit too much distance between the classes and the communities. There's too much emphasis on what amount of resources you have past the ones you need. We know people live in our communities day to day based on what they need. We need food. We need the lights to be on. Don't have enough money for gas in the car, so I got to go catch the bus. It's a different life, but it's just life. And wealth and higher education does not in any way constitute a better life. It depends on how it's lived and what you do. And I think that is a theme in Black studies, Africana studies, etc., that we have to learn this knowledge in order to ensure that it continues to exist. But more importantly, we have to learn how it is related to the life of our people, not our community, not our subdivision, of our people. And that is the most profound thing about that era, is that these people who could have done anything. Malcolm X could have been president of a Black college if he just got the honorary degree. You know what I mean? You're talking about somebody with an 8th grade formal education. But we have to not separate our experience from our living. We have to say all the time that those are my people. I'm their people. I love the fact that there are schools teaching this. And I love the fact that I have the honor to teach it too. And go beyond what the curriculum is that you can work from. I don't even look at that most of the time. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. And then I go back to what I'm doing. We do oral histories every year, do a thing on the Great Migration. And I have the students find 2 or 3 elders in their family or their community or their church that are 70 and over, 75 and over, I think is what the threshold is now. And it's very difficult for them because they're 18, 19. They don't have family that's 75 yet.
Yeah.
I think about that and say, oh yeah, that is true, right? And they don't have the community that we had. I knew all of my relatives, the elder relatives especially. And some of us, myself included, always when we went to their house or they came to our house, we wanted to hear them tell stories, So when you were living in Alabama, what was that like? Anybody get killed? Kids asking kids questions. My paternal grandmother is from Anderson, South Carolina. And she migrated to Detroit. She and her family, 14 children, and a mother and father, and landed in Inkster. And she was so traumatized by white supremacy. She went to Detroit when she was 13. And she wouldn't shake a white man's hand or a white woman's hand. Like we'd be at something and somebody say, oh yeah, this is my grandmother. And she would just stare at him in the eyes. She wouldn't extend her hand. The man's hand would be out. And he was like, oh, you're Michael's grandmother. And she wouldn't say a word ever. I don't care. If Jesus was white and came down and said something to her, she'd be looking at him the same way. Because whatever happened, and she would never tell us. She also carried a pistol the whole life that I knew of her. And we used to make jokes about it as we got older and understood her position and the gall, coming from the South, that could get you killed.
Yeah.
And she was like, I would never. And then she would throw these little tidbits in for the next few minutes. She would be like, they nasty, right? And say stuff like that, and then it just out of nowhere. They don't wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. So she had that side of her, like this encyclopedia of what white people, particularly white men, did. But she also had the rage and the conviction that whatever happened to her and her family would never happen again, not while she's alive. And she never went back. We tried to get her to go back. We wanted to go to where it wouldn't cross the Mason-Dixon line. The first time that she did it since she was 14 was when she came to Atlanta to my wedding. And she was kind of quiet about that, but because it was in Atlanta and it was Black, it's all these Black people interacting with each other. They went to these Black restaurants and stuff, which is similar to Detroit. But I could tell her feel ease. My paternal grandfather is from Montgomery. And not until I was a very grown man did he ever bring this up. Because I became kind of the family nationalist. I read all these books and stuff like that. And so we were talking one day and he said, "Did I ever tell you that I used to sell Marcus Garvey's newspaper on the streets of Montgomery?" I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I was a little kid and, they would bring these papers and you knock on door to door, you walk up to people and say, do you want Marcus?" And they always all sold out. And the whole thing I could think of as a academic and a researcher was, where are the papers?
Right.
Where are the papers? Are they in the basement? He said, "I don't know where those papers are." So when I went out there to Inkster the next time, I was all in the basement, nothing that I was looking for, but it's just the idea of a life that we know nothing about, but it's a historic life. It's the life that got us where we are here now today. My relatives were all self-defensors. They would never, ever submit to violence from white people. I've seen my father 2 or 3 times in Detroit face down some white men who, I guess they thought they could make him move out the way or something like that. And you ain't want to be messing with him. He was a veteran and he was a boxer, but he's like most Black men, full of rage. And the idea that you think I'm gonna step off the sidewalk so you can keep going, you have to be out of your mind because I ain't doing it. And those kind of things kind of really center you that this horrific thing that came across that ocean is so destructive to human life that our lives have to be fought for every generation. Every generation. What's that Fanon quote? Every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its own mission and either complete it or I can't remember the last word. But you know what I mean? This idea that all that was done in the past. This is where I talk to my students. So the movement is not done. It's just changed shape. And it's up to you to decide what this movement is going to be in your generation. And always have good response, mostly because they don't know these things. Even their mothers and fathers. I'm telling you, it's almost embarrassing to me when somebody asks one of my children, "What book are you reading now?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're not reading book." My mother would have been like, "Come in the house. Here's a book. Sit down and read this book." But their information is in this little box in your hand. It's in how they interact. So we have to figure out how we pass that on and not make them do what we did, but give them the tools to do what they need to do, which is, again, why Africana studies is so important. Under siege in public schools and private schools right now. You know that, right? Have they hit y'all yet? Trying to?
No, they have not yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's coming, right?
Yep.
Yep, it's coming. There's even discussion at places like Morehouse of calling it something else and making it just like my department is actually Africana Studies and History. And they wanted to absorb Africana Studies into history, but it wouldn't have that name. It would just be history. And then it'd be courses on this. And we were like, nah, that's not happening. That's like the 1960s. We're not doing that. That's the 50s and 40s. We're not doing that. And fortunately, I think the people who were proposing it came to their senses. I said, "So you're going to go over to Spelman and tell them they can't have Black women's studies?" Well, I think not. Right? I think not. And so our ideas are not often the most current ideas. And it's an interesting journey growing older because you have to remember that what we did was what we did. What they need to do is what they can draw from us and do
Mhm.
what they need to do it. It doesn't have to be how we do it. And I've been in a lot of meetings where people my age and older, they disrupt meetings because they want to know, why don't we just go downtown and do this and do this? And the younger people are like, what are you talking about? But the other part of it is some of them think that, yeah, that's what we should be doing right now. And it might be, but you gotta work that out. Part of our study is learning how to um, organize, learning how to transform society, learning what people did to do it, um, and still need it. Contemporary times. Colin Kaepernick lost his job. He's one of the best quarterbacks in football. Lost his job for taking a knee to protest against police brutality.
Mhm.
Even his brothers, many of them turned their back on it. And he's kind of in obscurity now. He gets people asking for speak engagements and stuff like that. Being rich helps. You
Yeah.
don't have to look for a job. But just the fact that he came through an era where there was Africana studies, where there was Black studies, where there was Pan-African studies, and clearly was influenced by those things. So that when he was an adult and a star quarterback in the NFL, he was grounded in a way that a lot of them weren't. His own sense of morality, his own sense of um, space and time and what belongs to whom. He has that knowing because he grew up with that. And so even though this might not be what they do or they might not want to do it, my experience has been once they start reading, and not just that, they all have to research and write an essay about a Black arts movement poet. Um, they all want to do the same ones. Sonia Sanchez and Mary Baraka.
Mhm.
Um, there's about 10 of them that they want to do. And I let them do it, but only one person can do it. Everybody can't do Sonia Sanchez. I called her up from class one day. We were in the class, and I said, "Hold on a second. I want you to talk to somebody." And so I called her up. She was at home, and she said, "Hey, Michael, what are you doing?" I said, "I have a class here that wants to say hi to you." And so they all said, "Hey, Miss Sanchez. Hey, Miss Sanchez." And a couple of them say, "I read your poem." Like she made one poem, right? She says, "I read your poem." And we were in that room for an hour longer because she talked to them, like, I don't know if you've ever heard her interact with young people or seen her. It's magical. And then she made me take my phone and go to every desk so each student got a private 2 or 3 minute talk with her. And
Wow.
she would tell them something, and she gave every one of them her phone number, which she always does. She was like, "Take this down. Michael, write this on the board." I said, "We don't even actually have a board like that anymore." But I will make sure they get your number. And she said, "No, no, I'm serious now." And they were just like, can't believe they went home and told their mothers and fathers, guess who I talked to today? And a lot of them said people didn't believe them. I said, "Why didn't they believe it?" They said, "They don't believe that I was on the phone with Sonia Sanchez in class." I said, "Well, she's not a god, but we'll have to call her back and ask her or ask her to send us something in writing that you can use." But things like that to me, sometimes they're spontaneous. Like it was just the end of the class, but we still had about 20 minutes. And I was thinking, which I usually say, y'all can leave if you want because we're done. But the thing that moved me to do that and some other stuff around the previous era is they don't know these people.
Yeah.
They don't know our great poets. They don't know our great composers. They don't know our great dancers. I asked them about the Elvin Ailey Dance Company. What did he do? Well, there's a clue in what I said.
Right.
You know? Oh, but they've not been exposed to it. They don't know the the wide ranging music beyond their music.
Mhm.
And that's problematic because both the beauty of it and the knowledge of these people in Jazz is the most complicated music in the world. It is, the drummer Max Roach called it Black people's orchestra music, and something similar to that. And part of it is the level of understanding, the gift, the working day and night for years and years to be able to figure out something. Most of our generation at these colleges now are not really, they don't really know much about jazz, even though it influences their music greatly. So, we have work to do in getting students into Africana studies. It's still work even at a HBCU. I have more students if I was just teaching a history class.
Yeah.
And then after the first day, the Africana studies classes go tell people. And by the next time we meet, I've had people who had sent me notes. Can you override the, put me in the class? So that's a good sign for me, that they found this so interesting that they wanted their friends to be in it. And there's always a comedic nature to teaching at an HBCU. I've had a student literally walk out of the shower when we were on Zoom, no clothes on, and just walking, talking to somebody, must have a thing in his ear or something. He's just walking and everybody's yelling at him. I'm like, turn off your camera. And everybody's just yelling and stuff, which let me know that he had it on mute. So he wasn't really listening anyway, right? Yep. And finally, after about maybe a minute, he looked and he saw the monitor and ran back in the bathroom. Boy, that class laughs. I don't know how he lived, because I'm sure all day he was getting it from his fellow students. The other one, this was more recent. This was last semester. We started class because I do virtual and on campus. 1 day virtual and 1 day on campus. Sometimes both. But he was laying in his bed with his bonnet on, smoking a big giant blunt, like he was in Jamaica, and he was just humming some song, and he had signed and said, "This is, their trick. I log in and then I disappear," and he's just smoking his weed and stuff, and so. The students started laughing and say, "You on camera, you on camera." And he's so high, he can't even hear them. And then finally, I guess he thought this, the class probably starts, so I should let the professor see me. And he looked over at there and all the students were waving their hands and yelling and stuff. That dude fell out the bed and we laughed so hard. And I was just hopeful that he set his dorm room on fire. So I know that sounds crazy, but I actually love it. I love those moments when they get something in their head. Oh, I'm supposed to be in class, not just act like I'm in class. You know that routine, right?
Yeah.
Sign on and then be gone. But yeah, but I think that it's one of the most important things that happen in our life is for us to create a system of learning about ourselves and about our interaction with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes. Well, so I appreciate everything that you said. And you kind of covered all of the topics I was going to ask you about. So, although I do just want to reiterate, I think that one of the things that really stuck out to me about how throughout the different examples that you gave and the stories that you told was just not only learning about ourselves and organizing this information, but the necessity of skill development in Black studies, both within and outside of the academy, right? You were told you're going to give this speech. And because you were given that task and expected to perform it, you rose to the challenge, but then that went on to provide you with an avenue and an inroad to keep doing the work. And so I really think that particularly in this moment where Black studies is once again under attack and Black people are continually under attack, that the both the knowledge and, like, the skill development piece are so integral from the field of Black studies, and that connection between the classroom and the community, and how that has to strengthen and continue for
Yes.
both the community and the discipline itself. So, thank you so, so, so much. Is there anything you want to add?
I'm so honored to be able to participate in this. One thing I skipped, my mother developed the first African American studies curriculum in the Detroit Public Schools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she did the first Black literature curriculum that to this day is still used with some additional stuff to it as we grew. She was also see these people, they do this stuff, and when you live it, it's kind of just like you don't think about it as being a big thing. But she organized the teachers at what was Eastern High School at the time. They went into a new building into not coming to work unless they renamed it to Martin Luther King High School, which they did. So you can see it's in the DNA in addition
Yeah.
to the team. But those things are small to a child, but they do give you what you need to be an adult and to be respected as a human being, as Malcolm would say, and to not, let people change that about you. So thank you all.